Congratulations, what a nice job you did on that. Sean will be tickled to have that. I'll bet.
Tom Oar became known as one of the toughest and quietest faces on mountain men. He lived far from busy cities and built a life that looked simple, honest, and strong. With his wife by his side, he spent years surrounded by cold winters, hard work, and the kind of peace most people only dream about. But behind that calm image was a life filled with old memories, painful losses, and parts of the past that never fully let go. What was really inside Tom Oar's cabin? And what did that small home reveal about the man he had been all along? Tom Oar lived a life shaped by grit, love, heartbreak, and the wild outdoors. Join us as we take a closer look at it all. Raised for the wild. Tom Oar was born on March 22, 1943, in Illinois, into a family that already knew the rodeo world well. His father, Cheeky Oar, was a professional rodeo cowboy, so Tom grew up around horses, rope tricks, and outdoor life from the very start. He later said, "My dad was a real horseman, and he passed that on to my brother and me." That one memory explains a lot about how his life began. By the time Tom and his brother were 7, their father was already teaching them trick riding. They learned to do dangerous moves on the backs of running horses. One of those tricks was the back vault, where they had to leap over a galloping horse and land on the other side. Sometimes they landed clean. Sometimes they hit the hard ground. Tom kept getting back up. That became part of who he was. When he was 8, he saw his father break his arm during a roping demonstration in front of a crowd. One second everything looked fine, and the next, his father was on the ground in pain. That moment stayed with him. The family also traveled through towns in Wisconsin and Iowa, doing Wild West shows filled with speed, noise, and danger. There were gunshots, hard riding, rope work, and plenty of risk. Tom saw early that this life could be exciting and painful at the same time. Even so, he loved it. He loved horses, open country, and doing things with his hands. Those early years gave him strength, balance, and a fearless side that would stay with him. Years later, Tom would say, "I was born 100 years too late, and sometimes, or maybe 200 years too late." That feeling stayed with him for the rest of his life. Long before television, Montana, or the cabin people came to know, Tom was already becoming the man the world would later recognize. When rodeo became everything. As Tom grew older, regular life started to feel too small for him. School did not seem to fit the kind of person he was becoming. By 14, he decided to walk away from formal education and focus on horses, training, and life outdoors. It was not a normal choice for a boy that age, but Tom felt more at home in open country than in a classroom. Later on, he said he never regretted that decision. He believed the real lessons came from life itself. By 15, he had found the thing that truly pulled him in: rodeo. He liked the danger, the pressure, and the test of nerve that came with every ride. One story he shared says a lot about his early spirit. His mother drove him to the edge of town, dropped him off with his bull rope and rigging bag, and he hitchhiked to Ohio to find work riding bulls and bucking horses. That was the kind of life he wanted. It was rough, uncertain, and full of risk, but he wanted it badly. In 1959, during a rodeo in Michigan, Tom rode a bull named Iron Jaw. The bull gored him in the thigh, and blood poured down his leg. There were no doctors available, so a local veterinarian stitched the wound with 12 stitches. The next day, Tom was back in the chute, ready to ride again. That moment earned him real respect. People saw that he was not just chasing thrills. He could take pain and still keep going. And soon, the rodeo life he loved would turn him into more than just another young rider trying to get noticed. It was only the beginning for him. He was built to take the hit. In 1962, Tom joined the International Rodeo Association full-time, and he made an impact fast. That year, he entered 15 bronc riding events and won 8 of them. Riders and fans noticed right away that he seemed to move with the horse instead of fighting against it. He looked natural in chaos, and that gave him an edge. One of his early standout moments came at a rodeo in Texas, where he stayed on a wild horse named Thunderbolt for 8.2 seconds. That became a local record because most riders could not even last 6 seconds. The ride pushed him into his first national finals only months after he started competing full-time. By the end of 1962, he was earning strong money from prize winnings and endorsements, and his name was gaining weight in rodeo circles. By 1965, he had become known for doing things his own way. He created a move called the suicide turn. It was a mid-air twist, where he shifted his weight at the exact second the horse spun beneath him. Most riders tried to stay as centered as possible. Tom leaned into the wildness of the ride and somehow made it work. At the 1965 IRA Finals, he used that move to score 85 points, one of the highest scores of that year. Fans loved it. Judges praised it. Younger riders tried to copy it, though few could match his timing or nerve. Tom also stepped into bull riding and competed in more than 200 events a year across 20 states. Before every ride, he would stand still, close his eyes, and picture how the bull might move. That habit helped him stay calmer than most. In 1967, during an IRA qualifier in Wyoming, his shoulder came out of place on a bull named Rattler. A medic forced it back in, and 10 minutes later, Tom got back on, finished the event, and even placed third. The ride that nearly killed him. The most devastating moment of Tom's rodeo life came on February 14, 1970. He climbed into the chute on a huge bull called Woolly Bugger, and what followed nearly killed him. Tom later explained, "I usually dropped a finger in my bull rope, which meant that your hand was locked into the rope." Then the gate opened. In his own words, "The moment the chute opened, there was some big eruption." The ride exploded into disaster almost at once. Tom's head and the bull's skull collided, knocking him unconscious. But his hand stayed stuck in the rope, which meant he was trapped on the animal while it bucked and thrashed. Tom described it simply. "So now my legs and stuff are underneath his hind legs. He's bucking and stepping on me quite hard." He was dragged, tossed, and stepped on for nearly 2 agonizing minutes before people were finally able to sever the ropes that held him. He left the arena on a stretcher and did not regain consciousness for 3 hours. He suffered a severe concussion and bruising across most of his body. In other details provided about the aftermath, he was driven to a hospital in a truck because there was no ambulance service at the arena. He later said it was the closest he ever came to death in a rodeo arena. Fate took a strange turn afterward. Tom said, "They told me that old Woolly Bugger, he died 2 weeks later. I think I gave him a concussion too." Amazingly, he returned to competition just 1 month later. Even so, something had changed. He was still brave enough to climb back in, but he never truly got back the same success he had before. The accident left behind fear, pain, and damage that stayed with him. He had survived one of the worst moments of his life, but rodeo no longer looked the same. The pain he could not ignore. Even after that terrible accident, Tom did not leave rodeo right away. He kept competing through the 1970s and into the early 1980s. He was still respected, still tough, and still able to place high. One of his later peaks came in 1980, when he finished as runner-up in the IRA bronc riding event. He frequently stayed in the top 10, but by then, the damage was too real to ignore. Over the course of his career, Tom broke more than 50 bones. He dealt with concussions, torn ligaments, broken ribs, and pain that never really left. His body carried the full cost of the life he had chosen. He also stepped into Hollywood stunt work for a while. In 1975, he got his first major stunt job in a western filmed in Montana. One stunt had him falling 15 feet from a moving wagon, and he hid padding under his chaps to do it. He earned good money per take, and directors liked his real riding skill. By 1978, he had stunt credits in 3 films. But that path hurt him too. A lasso stunt twisted his knee badly, and then in 1982, during a chase scene near Billings, his horse bolted and threw him into a ravine, fracturing his collarbone. That helped convince him that scripted danger was not much safer than rodeo. Slowly, another life began to call him. Tom later said, "It was time for me to quit, so I did." Some accounts say he retired in 1981. Others say his last saddle bronc ride came in 1984, when he was 41. Either way, by the mid-1980s, that chapter of his life was over. The choice was not only about pain, it was also about peace, trapping, hunting, and a quieter life with Nancy beside him. He had tested himself for years, and now he wanted a life where survival still mattered, but peace mattered more every single day. Behind the tough image was heartache. Tom's story was never just about one man alone in the woods. His personal life mattered just as much, and some of its heaviest parts stayed with him for years. Before Nancy, Tom first married Janice Fraser in the late 1960s, when rodeo still ruled his life. Their son, Chad, was born in 1971, and later they had a daughter, Keely. Those years belonged to a younger Tom, still moving from ride to ride and trying to build family life around a hard, unstable world. Later, in the early 1980s, he met Nancy at a rodeo after-party in Montana. What struck him was how calm she seemed in a loud room full of riders. She had a nursing background, and they connected quickly. In 1984, after a fast courtship, they got married. Tom was 35, and Nancy was 30. She left a stable job behind to step into a life that was far less certain. Over time, they became the team people admired on and off the screen. Nancy was not just beside Tom. She became part of the life he built in the wilderness and part of the story people connected with most. Their bond gave warmth to a life that could otherwise feel harsh and lonely. With that new chapter beginning, Tom was no longer just a rodeo man chasing the next ride. He was now thinking more seriously about where he wanted to live and what kind of life he wanted to build. Tom also carried a loss. In 2015, Keely died in St. Petersburg, Florida, at the age of 49. Tom never shared the cause, saying it was hers to keep. Her death changed him. It made him more inward and more quiet. Chad remained part of his life, too, though distance and different ways of living often created a gap that could be felt. He left it all behind for Montana. After marrying Nancy, Tom did not just dream about a different life. He moved toward it for real. Tom had come out to Montana in the summertime for rodeos and had fallen hard for the place. He had friends in Troy, and the land stayed in his mind. The wildness of it called to him. So he and Nancy loaded all of their possessions into an old pickup truck and headed west. Tom remembered that move clearly. He said, We had no idea what we were getting into or how I was going to make a living out here. But I just had a feeling that, by God, I can do it. I can get it done. The truck they used to begin that life was bought with money earned from muskrat pelts, which almost feels like an early sign of what was ahead. In the years after Rodeo, the couple settled in Montana's Yaak Valley, one of the most remote parts of the United States. They bought land and started over. They spent 5 years building their first log home, cutting every log themselves and splitting shakes for the roof. Later, they built the cabin near the Yaak River that viewers would come to know well. The first years were hard. The first winter they spent there was, in Tom's words, really, really cold. There were no easy jobs waiting for them. For many years, they lived without electricity or running water. But they were not looking for comfort. They were trying to build a life that felt real, even if it came with long winters, isolation, and hard work every day. Once they were finally settled, the next challenge was just as serious, finding a way to make that life last. He built a living the old way. Tom already knew something about trapping, but making a steady living from that world was another matter. Tom had been interested in moccasins since he was young in Illinois. Back then, he used commercial leather. Then, a trip to Canada changed his thinking. He bought a moose hide that had been tanned in the old primitive way, using animal brains instead of chemicals. Tom explained the difference in plain words. With brain tanning, you end up with almost cloth instead of leather. He made himself a pair of moccasins from that hide. Later, a Native American from South Dakota gave him a pair of fully beaded moccasins tanned in the same old style. When those wore out, Tom decided to learn the craft for himself. It was only 16 pages long and cost $3, but it opened a new direction in his life. Tom took to the work with patience and care. He later said, "The art of brain tanning is a lot of work, but hell, it's what I do." He became known for scraping hides, smoking buckskin, and stitching clothing and moccasins with old methods. Nancy helped too, sometimes spending days on a single deer skin. Tom then found a market for his work at black powder rendezvous events, where people recreated the old fur trade days in the Rocky Mountains. The most prized clothing there was brain-tanned buckskin, and Tom's work stood out right away. Orders started coming in. Hunting, trapping, tanning, and some odd jobs for the Forest Service became the base of their income. It was never big money. As Tom put it, "It's just been a meager thing. We never made $20,000 in a year." But it was enough to keep their life going. Even then, surviving in the Yaak was never just about money. It was about enduring the land year after year. And that part of the story was even harder. The wilderness kept testing them. The life Tom and Nancy built in the valley looked peaceful on the outside, but it was never easy. It demanded steady work and constant attention. For more than 40 years, Tom lived off-grid, and every season brought a different kind of test. Winters could stretch for 7 months, which meant preparing far ahead of time. Tom hauled firewood each winter on a handmade sled behind his horses just to make sure they could get through the cold. Later came even harder trials. During the 1995 blizzard, more than 4 feet of snow trapped Tom in the cabin for 10 days. He had no way in or out. He rationed venison and burned wood slowly, while the temperature dropped far below zero. He described it as one of the hardest winters of his life. The danger was not only weather. In 2010, wolves killed his trapping dog, Shadow. That loss hit him hard. He respected predators and knew the wilderness came with risks, but this felt deeply personal. After that, he started carrying bear spray every time he went out and built spiked fences around the cabin. Nancy was a huge part of keeping their life going. She kept a garden that fed them through much of the year with potatoes, berries, and preserves. At the same time, Tom kept making bows from yew wood and sharing the skills he had learned. He believed strongly that old knowledge should not disappear. He said, "Well, I know that I'm a dying breed. With the things that I've learned, I feel like I should pass them on, and I try to pass them on whenever I can." He also said, "It's real important to pass the knowledge on, or there aren't going to be no trappers if you don't teach the kids how to do it." That wish to teach gave deeper meaning to the life he had built. By then, the cabin was more than just where they lived. It held the work, the struggles, the memories, and the private weight of the life Tom and Nancy had built together. Then, television came, and the private world he had protected became public. How America Discovered Tom Oar. Tom rose to national attention in 2012 when Mountain Men premiered on the History Channel on May 31st. The show followed people who lived off the grid in some of the toughest parts of America. Tom was presented as a former rodeo cowboy living near the Yaak River in northwestern Montana with his wife Nancy and their dog Ellie. He trapped, harvested his own meat, and tanned game animal pelts using old native methods. Other cast members lived in places like North Carolina, Alaska, Idaho, Arkansas, Wyoming, and more, and the cast changed over the years. Tom did not. He stayed one of the show's most familiar and dependable faces from season 1 onward. Viewers quickly connected with him. Since the debut, he gave the audience many memorable moments. People watched him gather firewood and meat ahead of brutal winters, teach tanning methods, build primitive tools, and show younger trappers how to set lines. They also watched the quiet partnership between Tom and Nancy, which became one of the most loved parts of his story. A film crew of about 5 people followed him for about 1 week a month during filming season, but Tom said, "I just do what I normally do." He did not chase fame. He ended up on the show because a neighbor, Tim Linehan, mentioned him to people connected with Warm Springs Productions. They came, followed him for a day, and approved him. Tom later called his new fame kind of strange. The Yaak was not the kind of place where people expected to see a television crew. Yet now his life, his work, and his cabin were appearing on screens across the country. Tom and Nancy watched the show too, often without knowing exactly what would air. Tom said, "We sit down on Sunday night and watch it, and we don't know what it's going to be." He also said, "It hasn't embarrassed me." Still, the attention changed more than he expected. But once that quiet life reached television, it did not stay untouched for long. Success brought more than attention. Once Mountain Men became a hit, Tom's quiet life changed in ways he never looked for. His handmade work drew huge interest. Moccasins, bows, stone blade knives, and other goods became so popular that the demand quickly outgrew what he could make. After viewers saw him making a primitive bow, orders started pouring in. In another case, while an episode was still on television, the phone rang from a man in Florida who wanted to buy a stone knife before the show had even ended. Tom had gone from scraping out a simple living to being flooded with more work than he could ever fill. He said there were more moccasin orders than he could handle, and not enough moose left in the valley to supply all the people who wanted them. Fame also brought a stream of visitors to the property each summer. When asked how he handled that, Tom gave an answer that sounded just like him. He would rather people like him than hate him. Even with all that attention, he stayed warm, humble, and direct, still drawn to old skills, hard work, and quiet time. At the same time, he knew television liked drama. He said they sometimes made things seem more dangerous because otherwise he was too boring. Some moments were even recreated, like a wolf encounter shown with dogs. In his later years, age, grief, and rumor also became part of the picture. A fake obituary spread in 2020, and later denials had to shut it down again, showing how little control he had over stories told about him. Even as rumors followed his name, the man people saw on screen was changing in a much more real way. By 2023, Tom was shown more as a mentor, teaching knife sharpening, hide work, and trapping methods. But by then, the life Tom had spent decades protecting was beginning to change in ways he could no longer hold back. The mountains started pushing back. By 2024, the life Tom Oar had fought to protect for decades was starting to push back harder than ever. He was now in his 80s, and the same Yak Valley that once gave him freedom was becoming far more dangerous. In January 2024, he went through a major heart crisis late at night. He suddenly could not breathe, and the snow had blocked the roads, making help hard to reach. Nancy had to step in and perform CPR for nearly 20 minutes while they waited. Paramedics finally reached him by snowmobile, and doctors later said he had advanced congestive heart failure. He was unconscious for 3 hours. After that, doctors gave him a defibrillator vest and said he needed constant monitoring. That moment changed everything. It became the breaking point that forced Tom to seriously think about leaving the off-grid life he loved. Around the same time, the dangers around the cabin kept growing. In 2024, a wolf pack killed a prized animal near the property, adding to the feeling that the valley was changing. Falls on ice had also become more serious. After more than 40 years in the Yak, the wilderness was still beautiful, but it was no longer gentle. Tom had always believed in defending the place he loved. He once said, "This is my home. This is where I live, and I'll protect it with my life." But now, even that strong feeling was meeting a hard truth. Chad and other family members began urging him to move closer to Illinois for safety. At 81, Tom could no longer chop wood for even 30 minutes without becoming exhausted. For the first time, staying in the mountains no longer looked like strength alone. It also looked like risk, and that made the next chapter harder to ignore. And as Tom weakened, the cabin that once stood for freedom was starting to reveal just how much he and Nancy had been carrying in silence. What those last discoveries really meant. As the pressure grew, small details around Tom's life began to feel heavier than before. In early 2025, while cleaning a barn loft, the family came across old rodeo trophies from the 1980s. They were dusty, rusted, and easy to overlook, but what they brought back was much heavier. Those trophies were not just old awards. They stood for injuries, loneliness, long nights, and the grief Tom carried after losing Keeley. They were quiet reminders of how much of his life had been stored away, just like so many other things around the cabin. Around this same period, his public story was also reaching a turning point. Reports said his net worth in 2025 and again in 2026 was estimated between $200,000 and $250,000. That may sound modest for a television figure, but it also fit Tom well. He was never someone who seemed to care much about wealth. What mattered more was the life itself. Then came the news that made the shift impossible to miss. History confirmed that Season 14 of Mountain Men would be Tom's final season, with the new season set to premiere on September 3, 2025. The season description made it clear that Tom was standing at a major crossroads. In the teaser, he said, "It's hard to quit anything that you really like to do." That line says a lot about where he stood. After decades of rodeo, brutal winters, wolves, injuries, and hard mountain living, age was finally forcing him to face what even he could not hold back forever. Reports also said Tom and Nancy had relocated to Florida in recent years because it was a more manageable place as they got older, though there was still no public information showing his old Montana home was for sale. Even so, Tom was still appearing in public. In March 2026, it was announced that he and Paul Anchak would attend a pig roast fundraiser in Missoula on April 18th, giving fans a rare chance to meet him in person, even as his life was clearly entering a very different stage. And by then, it was becoming clearer that the things connected to Tom's cabin were telling a much bigger story than most people ever realized. After everything Tom and Nancy went through, do you think leaving that wilderness life behind was the right choice? Or should Tom have stayed in the place he loved most? Do you think Tom Oar ever truly left his old life behind? Or did the things found around his cabin show that he was still carrying it with him all those years later? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating history. See you next time.